This is the Interpersonal Communication Project, filmed and created by David Siegel. Slide number 2. We start off this presentation with what I believe as an introduction to interpersonal communication design. There is several different factors that make up interpersonal design. They are building identities, verbal and nonverbal contact, perceiving and listening, conflict and promoting dialogue, and I will discuss these factors in the next few slides. Slide number 3. I'll start off with a direct quote from Stewart, and I quote, identity, the definition is made up of interlocking features that mark how persons behave and or respond to others. When we build or create an identity, we establish who we are. Our identity is our way of presenting ourselves to the world, meaning that this is how we want other people to see us, to view us. When we build or create our identity, we establish who we are. Different cultures throughout the world may form different views on identity. Where a person lives, their social class, economical status, their background, education level, these all impact how identity is viewed in each different culture. Identity has four characteristics of self that I really find important. These characteristics are identities, which are multidimensional and changing, selves or responders. Identities are developed in past and present relationships, and identities can be declared or assigned. So multidimensional and changing means that they have many different forms, and they can change periodically, almost instantly, depending on their circumstances. Being a responder is basically selves. We are responding to what our identity allows us to. The development of these identities in past and present relationships. Past relationships can form identities of who we want to be, who we think we are. Something could stem from a past relationship, allowing us to have certain beliefs. In present relationships, we could see a identity in another person which we desire, and we then try to form our identity to mock that perceived or desired identity. Identities also can be declared or assigned. So somebody could say, I have this style of identity, this type of identity, when in fact somebody perceiving us could assign us an identity which is opposite to what we have declared ourselves. Next slide, slide number 4. Verbal and nonverbal contact consists of 3 sections that I find really important. These sections are primarily verbal, mixed, and primarily nonverbal. Slide number 5, primarily verbal, consists of symbols or written words. These can be used in any text form. Language is known as an activity. So this is something that a person does. A person will actively use language during contact. Soup is also a form of language, which is the content of the language or the meaning of the message. Next slide, slide number 6. Mixed content has several different factors. Voice, this is an element which is used within language. Speaking too loudly or speaking too softly are all elements of conversation. Silence, which is really interesting. Silence is actually viewed as an action and can be perceived in many different forms. So your response to somebody could be silence, nothing more than silence, and that can really have some detrimental effects on a person waiting on a response from you. It could allow them to become angry, actually, thinking that you're not listening to them, that you're simply ignoring them, when in fact you just choose not to respond. Facial expressions, they're a form of body language, and they coincide with the words which are spoken. Gestures or hand movements, things of that nature, are another form of body language that are used with words to get a meaning across. So, some people could do all kinds of different hand gestures, shown in my example, and it could mean different things. Somebody shaking their hand could be anticipating a response. Somebody's facial expression could be changed based off of perception or something, a cue that they're waiting on a response, something like that. So gestures and facial expressions are, like I said, all forms of body language that have effects on the conversation taking place. Next slide number 7, it talks about primarily nonverbal use, which there are several factors I have listed here. Facial expressions, again, are a form of body language which are used in the primarily nonverbal also. Eye contact is looking at a person with your eyes, showing them that you are engaging in that conversation and that you are listening to them. A lot of times people who don't make eye contact can be perceived as not listening, when in fact they may be listening and their mind may be going 100 miles an hour, perceiving and basically organizing the thoughts that are going through their head. Maybe direct eye contact is a distraction for them, so they choose not to make direct eye contact. Space is an interesting factor here. Sometimes people have an intimate level and they want to be close when they talk to somebody, or there is a personal space bubble, as I call it, where once you're inside that bubble, that person is now vulnerable and uneasy because you're invading their space, their personal space. There are several different distances that can and should be used based off of the type of conversation taking place. Also, distance is just like space, almost the same thing, meaning that some conversations require different distances between the people talking. So distance could be used as yelling. Baseball players, first, second, third base, they're going to have to yell to each other. So there's a distance there between those people. Whereas a batter and a catcher have an more intimate distance because they're a lot closer together, so they don't have to yell. They can talk at a normal tone and still hear each other. Touch is a direct way in which people express contact and show affection. A pat on the back for a good job done from your supervisor. A hug, or doesn't really, this is more personal, but holding your spouse's or significant other's hand, something like that. Also, gestures are different forms of body language that are used to show emotions and thoughts. Next slide number 8. Perceiving and listening are characteristics of good communication. Perception is how we view what another person is saying and how they're saying it. Selection is the discussion of which communication cues one wants to pay attention to. not meaning that we miss cues, but selection is more as the cues that we find important at that particular moment are the ones we're going to focus in on and possibly respond to. Organizing is when a person organizes the cues received during the conversation and kind of puts in order what these cues, puts in order the cues that are coming across to them in a way that they may understand it better. There may be, for an example, there may be somebody weaker at communication may, and I find myself doing this often, may list factual information in no particular order whatsoever. So they may list important facts last and least important facts first, maybe confusing the person listening. So that organization, really need to give the listener some time to organize those cues and thoughts before a response is anticipated. Inferring is when a person judges the cues and tries to make sense and meaning in the conversation, meaning that these cues are coming across. Okay, now I've perceived them, I've organized them, I've selected the ones I want to listen to. Now I'm going to judge these cues, and after a judgment's made, I'm going to offer my response to these cues. Next slide, slide number 9. Conflict is defined by Folger, Pohl, and Stutman as the interaction of interdependent people who perceive goals and interference from others in achieving those goals. Most people, when they think of conflict, will think of it in a negative way, when in fact productive conflict is a conflict in which a positive goal is expected and a good outcome is expected. Destructive conflict is conflict in which there's negative tendencies, and these negative tendencies can damage relationships and have some pretty bad effects on that relationship. Slide number 10 is dialogue. Dialogue is defined as a kind or quality of communication that happens when the people involved are present to each other's as persons. I really broke this down in 3 sections. The role of dialogue presents the fact. These are fact-filled statements that lets the listener perceive the message being broadcasted in a certain way. Tension within dialogue can and will occur when the message is misunderstood or simply missed altogether and a disagreement takes place, which is more times likely than not, unfortunately. When the correct dialogue is used, however, it can have positive impacts and allow for new relationships to form, meaning we can make friends or make new colleagues or acquaintances depending on what we're doing and who we're talking to. Slide number 11. So in conclusion, identity is formed to show others who we are. And really these are all puzzle pieces, and I got a breakdown of how they fit together. This identity is used with contact to help perceive and also listen to a message. This message may spark positive or negative conflict based off of the dialogue that is used. In other words, interpersonal communication is constructed of many different puzzle pieces, and when those pieces fit together, great communication will be the end result. I appreciate your time and thank you for listening.